President, I rise this afternoon to speak regarding the nomination of William Barr to serve as the next Attorney General of our country. First, I want to take a few minutes to reflect on the circumstances surrounding this vacancy. I believe that every member of this chamber should use this occasion to decide ultimately whether we believe Mr. Barr will be the Attorney General for all Americans, or whether Mr. Barr will be the Attorney General really for one American. When President-elect Trump selected then Senator Jeff Sessions, our colleague from Alabama, to serve as Attorney General for this country, it brought me no joy to vote against our longtime colleague and friend. The truth was, though, that his views, my views, were too often diverged on many important issues. They included immigration, healthcare, civil rights, voting rights, LGBT rights, environmental protection, and more. And after considerable prayer and reflection, I reached the conclusion that Senator Sessions would not be an Attorney General for all Americans. Unfortunately, during his tenure at the Department of Justice, he went on to preside over a number of divisive policies and decisions, including the Muslim ban, overturning protections for Dreamers, and asylum seekers, enacting a cruel policy of family separation at our southern border, and failing to defend the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act in court. Mr. President, I have not been shy about expressing my disagreement with these decisions and others made by the Department of Justice during the current administration. However, one area where I strongly agreed with Attorney General Sessions was his decision to recuse himself from the special counsel's investigation into Russian interference in our 2016 elections. Mr. President, one of my core values is to figure out what's the right thing to do and try to do it. Not what's politically expedient, not what's easy, but what is the right thing to do. And after it became clear that then Senator Sessions provided testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee that called into question his impartiality on matters relating to Russia and the 2016 election, Attorney General Sessions recused himself from all matters related to the 2016 presidential election. That was the right thing to do. And it certainly wasn't what our president wanted him to do. The president has said as much repeatedly. I should say maybe he's tweeted as much repeatedly. And the president repeatedly admonished Attorney General Sessions for doing what I think many of us believe was the right thing to do. And here's what the president of our country tweeted on June 5th last year, 2018. And I quote, "The Russian witch hunt hoax continues, all because Jeff Sessions didn't tell me he was going to recuse himself. I would have quickly picked someone else. So much time and money wasted, so many lives ruined, and Sessions knew better than most that there was no collusion," end of quote. Well, Mr. President, let me be clear. Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation is not a witch hunt. It is, in fact, the unanimous opinion of the U.S. intelligence agencies and law enforcement community that Russia attacked our democracy and interfered in our 2016 elections. As a result of the special counsel's ongoing investigation, 34 individuals and 3 companies have been indicted or pled guilty to a range of crimes. This includes the Trump campaign manager, the Trump deputy campaign manager, Mr. Trump's national security advisor, and most recently, President Trump's longtime political advisor. Special Counsel Mueller, a lifelong Republican, who served with distinction in the Vietnam War, a war that I think I'm the last member of this body that served in the Vietnam War, but he served there with real distinction. He served with distinction as our FBI director following the September 11th attacks. But he's not conducting a partisan witch hunt. He and the team he leads are striving to find out the truth, and in doing so, help us prevent future attacks on our democracy. I believe we should be doing everything in our power to allow Special Counsel Mueller and his team to conduct and complete this investigation free from political interference and partisan games. During the years I was privileged to serve as chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Bob Mueller was the head of the FBI. I had a chance to work with him, to know him. My wife and I know his wife. He's among the finest people I have ever known in the military, outside of the military, in government service, outside of government service. Unfortunately, President Trump does not view political independence as a prerequisite for the job of Attorney General. Instead, he tends to view political independence as a disloyal act, an offense for which one should be not hired, but fired. Just ask former Acting Attorney General Sally Yates. Just ask former FBI Director Comey, whom I also came to know well during the time I served on the Homeland Security Committee and including as its chairman. Just ask former Attorney General Sessions. Recall with me, if you will, that after the November election, President Trump fired Attorney General Sessions and named the Attorney General's Chief of Staff, Matt Whitaker, as Acting Attorney General. This was a curious decision, as well as a legally questionable decision. Why would the President go outside the line of succession at the Department of Justice? I fear it's because of Mr. Whitaker's public comments regarding the Mueller investigation. Mr. Whitaker previously likened the special counsel's investigation to a fishing expedition, to a witch hunt, and implied that following the truth, this is a quote from him, could be damaging to the President of the United States and his family, and by extension, to the country, to our country. Really? Could he have been serious in saying that? Getting to the bottom of all this could be damaging to the President of the United States and his family, and by extension to our country? Another president a long time ago, Thomas Jefferson, used to say these words: if the people know the truth, they won't make a mistake. Thomas Jefferson. If the people know the truth, they won't make a mistake. Hardly the views of our current president. And it saddens me to say that. Well, despite publicly expressing these views that they clearly call into question his impartiality, Mr. Whitaker did not recuse himself from the Mueller investigation when he assumed the role of Acting Attorney General, even though he received a recommendation to recuse himself from ethics officials at the Department of Justice. Mr. Whitaker's staggering unfitness for the job is a big part of the reason why my initial reaction was positive when President Trump nominated William Barr to be our Attorney General. After all, Mr. Barr previously served as Deputy Attorney General and then as Attorney General during the administration of George Herbert Walker Bush, someone I revere, I think that many of us revere. By all accounts, Mr. Barr is a well-qualified nominee, someone who's been a fine public servant throughout many years of public service. I strongly believe that we need Senate-confirmed leadership of the Department of Justice, and I want to make it clear that during normal times, I might be inclined to support Mr. Barr's nomination. In fact, I probably would. These are not normal times. These are extraordinary times. In addition to firing the Attorney General and the FBI Director for their views on the Russian inquiry, President Trump has reportedly asked those around him why he didn't have an Attorney General who was looking out for his personal interests. According to reports, the President has said, and I quote, "Where's my Roy Cohn?" during moments of crisis. And for those who may not know, Roy Cohn was President Trump's personal lawyer and fixer, who pushed legal tactics to the limit and also once served as staffer to Senator Joe McCarthy during a very dark period in our nation's history, a very dark period in this Senate's history. This is how President Trump views the role of Attorney General. Not as a lawyer to defend the right and the rights of all Americans, but as a fixer who will look out for him. Moreover, in his State of the Union address last week, President Trump highlighted what he sees, and I quote again, ridiculous partisan investigations, end quote. He went on to say, and I quote, if there is going to be peace and legislation, there cannot be war and investigation, close quote. It is against this extraordinary backdrop that we must ask ourselves, well, what are Mr. Barr's views on presidential powers? What are his views on the investigation led by Robert Mueller? As it turns out, we don't have to guess what the answer is to that question. In an unsolicited 19-page memo that Mr. Barr sent to Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and President Trump's personal lawyers, Mr. Barr shares his views, and they're clearly hostile to the special counsel's investigation. In a memo entitled Mueller's Obstruction Theory, Mr. Barr raises doubt about the special counsel's ability to follow the truth while going on to defend President Trump's actions and even suggesting that the president has the power to limit the scope of this inquiry. In that same memo, Mr. Barr states that the special counsel's investigation into obstruction of justice may do, and I quote again, lasting damage to the presidency. Well, Mr. President, I believe that reasonable people can disagree, as I frequently did with my friend, former Senator, then Attorney General Jeff Sessions. It's clear to me, however, that despite whatever your views may be toward the special counsel's investigation, the views expressed in his memo not only warrant Mr. Barr's recusal from the special counsel's investigation, they cry out for it. Attorney General Sessions did the right thing when confronted with a similar decision. However, despite expressing these biased views to President Trump's own personal lawyers, Mr. Barr says he will not recuse himself from the special counsel's investigation if he is confirmed. And to make matters worse, Mr. Barr refuses to commit to making the special counsel's final report public. Mr. President, earlier I asked for us to consider whether Mr. Barr will be the Attorney General for all Americans or whether Mr. Barr will be the Attorney General for one American. That one American happens to also go by another name, Individual One, the legal moniker given to President Trump in the Southern District of New York for directing his personal attorney to violate federal campaign finance law. Like Mr. Whitaker's public comments prior to his elevation to acting Attorney General, I fear that Mr. Barr's memo may have been an audition for the job and that his selection may not be a coincidence. During a Senate hearing in 1989, Mr. Barr plainly stated that the Attorney General is, this is a quote, the president's lawyer, close quote. Colleagues, these are extraordinary times for our nation. We must make it clear to the American people that the Attorney General is not the president's lawyer. We need independence at the Department of Justice now more than ever. And while I hope I'm wrong, I hope I'm very wrong. It is my belief that President Trump views this appointment as an opportunity to protect himself rather than the constitutional rights of all Americans. Ultimately, for all of these reasons I've laid out, I've concluded that Mr. Barr, despite his earlier service, distinguished service in many instances to our nation, does not in this instance meet the standard that's necessary to be Attorney General for our country now. And sadly, on that note, Mr. President, I will yield the floor. Thank you.